It's Momo Monday, and you know what to do. Breathe in. And out. And breathe in. And out. And a viewer asked me last week to elaborate on something I said in a previous video. And Momo thought it was a good idea to do with this topic. Oh, this is the Momo Monday topic for the week. It is something that is sensitive. That's what we do on Momo Monday. We take deep breaths and then we deal with sensitive topics because it is worth talking about. It's a sensitive topic because a lot of people who give a damn about people, mostly on the left, but sometimes on the right, have had the term political correctness used against them as a weapon. And I made a comment about, we need to differentiate between political correctness and common decency. And that's what the viewer asked me to elaborate on. And I realized, that is sort of a more complicated concept than I thought it was. Because to me, political correctness, there is an element of political correctness that I do believe is real. And I do believe gets really silly. And I encountered this when I did a lot more active, organized nonprofit work. And every 6 months, the terms for how we refer to people change. And that, to me, is political correctness, that your opinions haven't changed one iota. Your belief that everybody deserves to belong and everybody deserves inclusion and all that stuff. And you judge people by actions, not identity politics. All that stuff doesn't change, but you have to change the words you call people because somebody determined that a word that was perfectly fine 6 months ago isn't okay anymore. That's political correctness to me. And the marker of political correctness is there's an element of dishonesty to it. There is also an element of academic and economic privilege inherent in political correctness because you have to be in certain elite channels, you have to be in certain elite communities to even get the information about what the politically correct phraseology is at any given point. And this is when I get off the politically correct bus, because I grew up in neighborhoods that were very marginalized. There were a lot of people of color. We were struggling with issues of, LGBTQIA, XY, LMNOP. We were dealing with that stuff back when I was in high school. And there was a difference between a word like gay versus homosexual, like is gay an insult or not, because it was a term that was being reclaimed at the time. And people had different opinions like that. Everybody recognized that, the F word to refer to gay people was an insult. And that's the difference to me between political correctness and just common decency. The moment where it stops being politically incorrect and you are just being an asshole is when someone right in front of you tells you to stop and you start telling someone they're being too sensitive and you continue to do it. Why? Because that steps out of the realm of, this is something you shouldn't say to anyone in this group. And it brings it into the realm of you are dealing with an individual and an individual's personal experience and sensitivities. And if you care about an individual, if you care about that individual's opinion of you, then you respect the things that they have sensitivities about. And I'm a big believer that if you want to continue to spend time with a person, you don't get to say they're too sensitive. There are consequences to behavior. If you don't want to associate with the person anymore, stop associating with them. That way you can say whatever you want and no one's going to complain. Everybody involved is okay with it. No one's getting hurt. At that point, say whatever you want. It can be as politically incorrect as you want. It's not violating common decency because no one's getting upset. Everybody understands it's just a joke. But too many people have been almost raised in the politically incorrect political correctness of Chan culture. And it is politically correct within Chan culture to say, I don't care about your feels. This is a statement that makes you seem part of the in-group and therefore acceptable within those communities. And this is where you have to start being careful, because the minute you start engaging in tribal language, you are being politically correct. That's the whole idea of the original usage, the original meaning of political correctness, in that it was application of essentially fascist doctrine, more tied to, Communist Party and socialist and things like that. But you have to toe the party line. That is what political correctness is. And so this is what I want to challenge people about, because I see people doing this a lot. It's the, I don't care about your feels. And then you engage in a conversation. And I tend to see how consistent people are by, okay, fine. You say you don't care about feelings. You say feelings don't matter. I'm going to be as blunt as possible to see how you react, because to me, someone who actually doesn't believe feelings should matter in a debate can take that because they're consistent in their principles. At that point, fine. That's your ethical belief. I don't agree with it. I may not choose to associate with somebody who's constantly rude because it just causes too much problems for me. I get all these people saying, why do you talk to that person? And I can only fight so many battles. But at least it's consistent. I can respect consistency. But what I find is a lot of these people who use Chan speak, who use the politically incorrectness of 4chan, actually can't walk the walk. So they get very upset when people insult, say, gamers. They get very upset when anime is disparaged whole cloth as being sexist or violent or whatever. And that's feelings. Because from a purely intellectual perspective, why do you really care if someone insults your favorite thing? That's a feeling response. And so at that point, you are being inconsistent and you are saying certain things just to toe the line, just to fit in. And that's not actually being honest. And that to me is when political correctness, or as I call it more accurately, tribal language, tribalist language, that's when it kicks in. And that's when I bail out. Because I don't believe in political correctness. I don't believe in tribalist language. And I don't care if it's on a message board, if it's on a subreddit, if it's on some sort of academic group. I think it's wrong. What tribalist language does, also known as politically correct speech, it distances you from regular people, from people who don't have the privilege of having the time to burn to either sit on message boards for hours and hours and hours or take courses on gobbledygook that teach you right speak. People who really have to work for a living. I'm talking sweat equity. I'm talking long hours. I'm talking stuff where you have to show up and you have to be engaged and you can't spend a lot of time on the computer for social reasons. Those people don't have the luxury of learning those subcultural language, those subcultural vocabularies. And if people start being mocked for not knowing language, which basically indicates that you have the privilege of free time, that's a problem. Because I don't believe that people should be judged based on what vocabularies they've been exposed to. I think they should be judged by the caliber of their ideas. And I think in this mess of either wanting to be politically correct or jumping on people for being politically correct, common decency has been lost. If it's, here's my problem I have with their logic on this point, that's fine. But you don't really know a person's heart based on what they write online. I try to be as fair as possible to other video game analysts, other people who work in games, as I can be. Because most people in video games do not have any journalistic training outside of games, because it's too hard to get all the bloody qualifications you have to get for journalism and all the bloody qualifications you have to get to be a games writer. You wouldn't start until you were about 35, and that's too old. They want millennials. And so you've got people who either have a lot of knowledge about games and no knowledge of journalism, or vice versa, and they have to learn on the job. And so this is me being decent. And so I will forgive slips here and there if I feel like somebody at the end of the day has the right intentions and has potential. I see potential in people, and there are little things. Their willingness to talk to people whose politics, for instance, are different than their own is a big sign to me that someone has potential. And I'm not going to judge them because they use social justice speak, or Chan language. Being decent, thinking someone is decent, does not mean they think exactly or even majority like you. That's just tribalism all over again. It's, at the end of the day, do you see them trying to at least have a conversation? And I think that this tribalism that's taken us over, this political correctness, has gotten in the way of having the moral license to essentially be decent to people who think differently than us. I remember my mother coming home from work so frustrated because you couldn't call somebody a chairman or a chairperson anymore because those were the politically incorrect terms. You had to call them a chair. And I remember my stepfather going, "A chair's bloody furniture." And he was offended by suddenly having to call a person by a chair. A few years later, he became the chair of biology at the university and had to have everybody call him a piece of bloody furniture. And that's why you can't push back against the change in language too hard. But at the same time, you can't push for language evolutions too hard either. Meanings of words change. And that makes it very difficult sometimes to recognize what a person means. And people get frustrated and they throw up their hands and they just want to write somebody off as evil instead of recognizing, especially on the internet, that, hey, maybe English isn't someone's first language. Maybe because of where they came from, they don't have the same higher education. It is not decent. It is not just to judge a person because they did not have the same opportunities and privileges that you did. And if everybody involved in these tribal wars, these cultural tribal wars, just got a little dose of humility and recognize that the person you're talking to may just have not had the opportunity to learn the good words that you have. Maybe you'd actually learn something from the other person. Maybe you just have a more pleasant conversation. But I find a lot of people, especially on social media, but also in these so-called debates that don't follow any Oxford rules or any other rules of debates that I've ever seen. They're free-for-alls of people yelling at each other. What I see them doing is talking past each other to their various audiences. They're not actually engaging with the person they're ostensibly there to talk to. And that's a problem because that is dialogue as performance, not listening to understand or communicating to understand. And that's where we get all the dog whistles and the coded messages and all the stuff that's really ambivalent and insidious. And people are like, I don't trust anything, fuck the mainstream media. The truth is, there's certain things that the mainstream media is very trustworthy for. It's not that they don't make mistakes, but they try to get it right. Now, the one thing they're terrible at is gaming and tech news. Because remember what I said about it takes a long time to learn how to be a good journalist and it takes a long time to learn how to be good at tech. And if you try to do both, you don't start working until you're 35, and very few people can afford to do that. That's what's going on in the mainstream media. So you got to watch the political correctness, because at the end of the day, political correctness is just tribal language. What I encourage people to aim for is common decency. That's all that is really fair to expect from someone. And common decency dictates that if somebody says, can you stop that? It really bothers me. You stop. Because the assumption is you want to continue to communicate with this person. You understand that a person reserves the right to not communicate with you if they keep telling you to stop doing something, and you continue. Because here's the little secret. Decent people are decent because they want to associate with other decent people. Where you essentially treat people decently. You don't get too upset about bad language. But if somebody tells you to knock it off, you knock it off. And if you've really hurt somebody, you make that right if you want them to still be in your life. It is that simple. And yeah, it takes communication and it takes a little bit of situational awareness. Or if you've recognized about yourself that you don't happen to be very good at sensing when people are uncomfortable, there's no harm in asking. There's absolutely no harm in asking. There's this guy I talk to in Twitter DMs, and he is constantly worried that he's coming off badly or he's offending me or upsetting me about something. And he's so aware of it that when he does say something that would otherwise be, I don't know how I take this, I just assume he didn't mean anything by it, because so many other times he has shown consideration for my comfort in a conversation that I can make that positive assumption about him. And that's what it's about. But if you're engaging in the outrage warrior political correctness, word policing, or if you're engaging in the Chan subreddit, I don't care about your feels, let's look at porn, political correctness, because it is a form. If you actually stop and think about it, that stuff is a form of political correctness on its own. When you're on a message board and you're using words that you wouldn't otherwise normally use because it's the way things are done there, that's political correctness. And this is when the critical thinking has to kick in. And I get go along to get along, but you have to recognize what you're doing. And the reason you have to recognize what you're doing is so when you get into situations that are not that, you're not so taken in by the tribal language of your in-group that you deny yourself opportunities by just offending everyone around you because you're so far down the rabbit hole, you don't actually realize anymore that your behavior is not just inappropriate, it's antisocial. Okay, so think about that. I'm sure people will be super mad at me for some of the things I've said in this video, and that completely misses the point of this video. So let's close off and everybody calm the heck down by 2 deep breaths. Breathe in. And out. And breathe in.